Before we start, I have to say that I feel much less worthy for this interview than other people you're talking to. And no matter what I do or achieve in life, I will never be as cool as people who are fighting and dying for Ukraine. So,
Illya, I find you interesting to talk to about Ukrainian politics because you're not only Ukrainian and in the middle of everything, but you're also a hedge fund analyst. So you get paid to make accurate predictions about the future. So you and I were chatting on Telegram in the weeks leading up to the invasion, and I want to read out some of the things you said several weeks before the invasion started. So 3 things. Point number 1, people think that the Russian force at our border is not enough for a major invasion, despite the US and others talking about it all the time. I'm more worried than average, because in my opinion, Putin will look super weak if after all the saber rattling he does nothing, and people underestimate the price of a mistake like not being prepared of getting into an actual war. It's a pretty good point. That was 4 weeks before the invasion started. Second is, in my opinion, a major invasion is super stupid and risky for Putin. In World War II, for example, Germans assaulted only Kyiv city with 0.6 to 0.7 million troops and lost more than 60,000. I'm sure the Russian army can do a lot of damage to the Ukrainian army in the first weeks with rockets and air support, but it will be just the beginning of their end. Cities are still hard to take. Ukraine will get a lot more help, and Russians are always underestimating Ukrainians' resolve to fight. It'll take months probably for us to get mobilized, but a lot of people would be pissed enough to fight Russia eventually, like really a lot.
oh man, I wish I traded as well as I wrote messages to you.
Hopefully you do. That's how
No,
you're paying for
we lost a ton of money.
all your pastimes, which are quite expensive. But third one, referring to motorbikes. The last one is, again, this is on January the 24th, 2022. You wrote, in terms of timelines, there's officially major army maneuvers in Belarus on February the 10th to the 20th. Russian forces are already arriving there in large numbers. Plus, perhaps China is asking Russia not to invade during the Olympics, which is the 4th to the 20th of February. So the end of February is the most likely time for an invasion. And indeed, the invasion happened on the 24th of February. So these are good examples of why you're interesting to talk to about these things. You make very, very accurate predictions 4 weeks before the start of the invasion. So my first question is, what has surprised you since the start of the war?
I have to tell you that as I was going through this in real time, what surprised me most was that Putin just continued. He saw that, his plan failed on like day 3 or 4, and he just went on. And there's no plan B, as the people say, as the people writing right now, there's no plan B. For me, it was clear that this thing is failed on like day 5 of the invasion, because they got stuck near Kyiv, and they were dispersed throughout all the country. They failed, other than Kherson and Mariupol, they failed to take major cities, and assaulting them with people defending them is super hard. So I thought they should negotiate some kind of settlement right now, and they just didn't. She just kept going. So that's what surprised me most. But I have to tell you that I also failed in many ways, because first of all, we lost a lot of money. Second of all, my mother lives pretty much near the Holodomor airport. So first, when they were landing there and there was a lot of fire, and we were like talking with her, like, should she flee or not? So like 5 hours into the invasion, it was clear that they are getting killed there in the Holodomor airport, and this all already looked pretty retarded. So I actually told my mom that, I don't know, this looks kind of okay. And then she had to stay in the occupation, and that was one of the many decisions that we were wrong about. And of course, if you talk about investing, this prolonging of the war is very bad for economy in Ukraine, but nothing you can do about it.
So your main problem is underestimating the stupidity of the Russian leadership.
Yeah. Not stupidity. It's some religious. It's some religious crazy ideas which are not grounded in reality. And when they started, they just could not stop. And this is like a bigger topic that I kind of was thinking about a lot. How it's you know, if you're in the business of prediction, you want to find some predictability, like model something, okay? And you need to model people actions in the future. And you, as you live, you develop your skills and you find more and more models. And like the model I have now is that I stole it from so-called Adlerian psychology by a guy called Adler.
Yeah, I'm reading about it at the moment, coincidentally.
Yeah, he was like in the time of Freud and Jung, he was like hanging out with them or something. And so he says that the biggest force in the universe is the people's desire to not change. And if you talk about large system of people, this is even more true for totalitarian like states. You can see how hard it was to China to reverse their COVID policy. And you see, because in this totalitarian system, like the supreme leader is super smart and always right. Okay, these systems really fail at acknowledging their errors and like turning around. This is my big lesson from this. And now, as we're looking at China and just worsening relations with the West and everybody, and just pushing this. The potential, the Taiwan aggression, and also failing to somehow reform the economy. The Xi Jinping just puts more loyal people into important positions, and it's just repeating Soviet Union, but a little bit slower because they do have some capitalism, but they still have a huge state-run economy. But it's the same thing. Like I'm witnessing this over and over again, how these systems, they fail to change their ways, even if they're wrong.
I guess because it breaks the narrative. Like totalitarian regimes have a narrative where the supreme leader is always right, so when they make a mistake, they just can't change policy, even though it would make sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so digging into our Telegram chats again, you wrote February the 21st, 3 days before the invasion. Not a prediction, but you said, I remember myself thinking during the Maidan revolution that, wow, I'm in the first row seat watching the collapse of the Russian Empire. This invasion will not end well for Russia. I mean, it's not going well for Russia. We don't know how it's going to end, but...
Yeah, I can say that it's even more clear now than it was before, yeah.
Actually, you mentioned that you were involved in 2 revolutions. What was the other one?
The Orange Revolution. I was 17 back then, in 2004.
Wow. What did you get up to when you were 17?
Just going to protests and, you know, chanting and getting really close to getting hit by a riot police. But 2004 was like easy peasy, nothing. Maidan was, for me, emotionally probably even bigger like than this war, because I wasn't on the front lines. Of course, this war is like much bigger human loss and all, but unlike other people you interviewed, I wasn't there. So for me personally, that experience is still like the most emotionally charged experience of my life.
What were you doing in the Maidan revolution?
Again, I was helping protesters in every way I could, but I saw some of the big fights there. I saw people getting killed, but I was, you know, still trying to be a little bit risk averse and not being right on the front line, but help in any way I could. And just as a lot of people did. And by the way, I told you about this, the Reddit 15 minutes of fame, because like unlike this war, I felt back then that we are losing the information war really bad. Like this time everyone is on Ukraine's side. And back then the Russian propaganda machine already started spending $1 billion to convince everybody that, you know, these are evil Nazi radicals who came to power, overthrew legitimate government, and they're going to kill all Crimeans, so they need to be defended and blah, blah, blah. So I tried to explain to Reddit that this is not so, and this blew up and to the Reddit front page, and I was pretty proud about that.
That's another good example of Ukrainian initiative beating the Russian information machine.
Yeah, coming back a little bit. So I saw how people just do not change their closely held opinions, which are close to their identities. Because back then, like, you have something happening in Kyiv, and you have like all these Russian news saying these are radicals that came to power, And then we have legitimate, internationally recognized elections, and nationalists fail to get into parliament. So you would assume that people will say, well, maybe those news were not entirely true. And then some years later, we elected Zelensky, who was like super kind of pro-Russian, kind of downplaying Russian role in the in Ukraine, and saying that it was because of the previous president the war continues. And he was like well known in Russia, who is super funny and nice guy. Like how could you believe this guy is the evil Nazi dictator and like a Satan? but now like I see how much I and other people underestimated both how propaganda works and how information bubbles work, and how these societies, in these information bubbles can stay pretty much delusional for a long time. And I was especially surprised about, as a finance guy, I know a lot of finance guys in Russia who are clearly intellectual, and I was looking up to some of them. So I was like reading some Russian blogs and stuff. And I identify as an intellectual myself, so I think that, intellectual has no nation. They're all the same everywhere. They're like concerned about the truth and curiosity and forming some accurate view of the world. And slowly but surely, starting from Maidan, but especially during this war, I saw that how that's just not so. How very smart people who are super informed, who read the press, who have Bloomberg terminals and read all kind of press from all over the world, but just because they are Russians and they hang out with other Russians, they have a lot of these biases. So people who I looked up to, they started like writing that, this is kind of Ukraine's fault. Ukraine should just have folded to Putin, and talking about these Russian-speaking populations, how they're hurt in Ukraine, while anyone with experience living in Kyiv would tell you that 80% of Kyiv was always speaking Russian, and it's just a ridiculous point. And it's a ridiculous point that you could not, it does not have any water in it at all. Like there's nothing. But still, then you hear foreign intellectuals repeating the same points, how Russian-speaking population need to be protected, and somehow Russian-speaking population, of course, wants to be part of Russia, and it's just scary. There's society, average member of society has pretty weak skills about forming an accurate picture of reality, and media is failing society in this regards, massively, because it's free most of the time. People don't want to pay for it, so it has to get views. So it has to be clickbaity above all, and not doing any job about actually informing people. And you have these algorithms on YouTube and Facebook which show you what you want to see, and not try to form some accurate picture of reality. So it's well researched that YouTube just shows you more and more aggressive views.
Right.
And
people go
on
down
Russians,
a rabbit hole, and the stuff that outrages people gets shared, so that gets pushed to the top of the algorithm, and so
yeah, and it has nothing to do with informing society. So,
which makes me want to ask, what's your opinion of Elon Musk's takeover of Twitter? This is not a question you're expecting me to ask, but I was going to mention him in a different context.
I think, I don't want to say Elon Musk is some evil guy. Obviously, he's helping Ukraine somewhat, so thank you, Elon Musk. But also, I want to say that by having some experience in living in Ukraine and seeing how other people look at it, and how shallow their understanding is, I want to say that every time you look at some long-term conflict of some societies And if you're not part of that, you probably know shit about it. So it just there's just you can use that rule and not say anything like Elon Musk is saying, because he probably because he achieved so many things, he probably thinks he is smarter at all other things that he knows nothing about, and probably he speaks to a lot of Russians as well.
I'm actually going to quote his tweet. He tweeted this when I was last in Kyiv in October last year. So that's 2022. I'm really bad at remembering what year it is. He wrote on October the 3rd, Ukraine-Russia peace. Redo elections of annexed regions under UN supervision. Russia leaves if that is the will of the people. Crimea, you will come back to it. Crimea, formerly part of Russia, as it has been since 1783 until Khrushchev's mistake. Water supply to Crimea assured. Ukraine remains neutral. He then added, this is highly likely to be the outcome in the end, just a question of how many die before then. And also worth noting that a possible, albeit unlikely, outcome from this conflict is nuclear war. Now, not to speak for Ukrainians, but any Ukrainians I've spoken to about this always say, look, we love Elon Musk because he gave us Starlink, but he's just wrong about this. I'm sure he's well-intentioned, but why does that plan not work?
Well, first of all, you cannot have a fair election in Russia. Russia does not know how to do that. You cannot hold a fair election under Russian guns and in areas where people who are anti-Russia just fled and the Russians just drove in. So that is not a fair election or referendum by default. And not to mention other talking points about just repeating Russian propaganda, how Khrushchev gave Crimea to Ukraine and blah, blah, blah. Look, guys, for most of my life, I lived in independent Ukraine. And, politics is, you can think about it through historical perspective, like he's saying now. But you can also say that this is like relations of groups of people. So group of people, Ukrainians, and group of people who are now Russians, we signed a bunch of treaties that we are recognizing each other's borders. We are gonna be super friendly and not have wars. That the Ukraine is giving up nuclear weapons in exchange for Russia guaranteeing and other great powers guaranteeing our sovereign territory and stuff. So like Elon Musk kind of ignores a lot of other aspects of this deal, so to speak. Because Ukraine is the only country who gave up nuclear weapons, and now forcing it to concede to Russian threats with nuclear weapons is literally the most optimal way to guarantee future nuclear war on this planet. Because every state will then understand that these alliances and these agreements and all the stuff.
That was such a good role as well.
And also, let's not forget that Russians are not very friendly to anyone on occupied territories. Like they have 30, 40 torture chambers in Kherson, including torture chambers for children. So Elon Musk is basically saying, yeah, let's torture some 100,000 of Ukrainians. Who cares about that? And many other aspects of how this outcome of appeasing such a dictator is much worse for the world. And the other thing I want to mention is it's a huge, long-term mistake of Putin and many other intellectuals who are against, aiding Ukraine, is failing to see the agency of Ukrainian people. Some Jordan Peterson will say, yeah, that if we just stop sending Ukraine weapons, this war will stop. And my answer to that is, what if it won't? What if Ukrainian people decide to fight with stick and stones, and you will just see Ukrainians die in much larger numbers, but still willing to fight? Will you, invade Ukraine to force Ukraine not to fight? What will you do? What's your plan then? You just made this conflict much worse with your stupid ideas. And Putin is the same. He just fails to see Ukrainian agency. because Russian people have no agency. They're just kind of like a little bit like cattle, maybe, like accepting anything, like not protesting ever. So he assumes that other peoples are like that, and he fails to understand that this Maidan revolution happened. And Russian intellectuals I talk to are the same. They will say that this happened because US supported it. And Ukrainian nationalism happened because CIA funded Ukrainian nationalists in the 50s, and so that is why like Ukrainians are now believe that they are not Russians. I mean, this is completely retarded. We are much older people than you are.
Okay.
So yeah, failing to see Ukrainian agency is huge in all these people who are anti supporting Ukraine.
Right, and it happens in both Russia and in the West.
And in the West, yeah.
So in the second week of the invasion, I was organizing a projection project in London, broadcasting messages from friends in Ukraine, and asked you if there was a message you wanted to get across to Londoners, and you chose a message on that topic: free people fighting an invasion of slaves.
Yeah, something like that. I'm not happy with the wording, but like the message is correct. Here's a point I want to point out. So not so long ago, this Telegram channel Gulagu.net, that was before this war. He posted a lot of a huge like data dump of videos of torture in Russian prisons, where people get like raped and stuff, and like no one cares in Russia. There's no protest, nothing. So people are giving away their right not to be raped in their ass with a bottle. And I also call the Russian regime bottle feudalism. Yeah, that's the system. Because like if your master does not like you, he can rape you, and that's how it works, and everyone is fine with you. And then they invade here because they want to like spread their wonderful Russian values of bottle feudalism everywhere. And they're like happy to die for it. I mean, it's just retarded.
Yeah, I think there's one of the mistakes people make when... I heard this in London a few weeks ago. A perfectly nice English couple came up to me at an event, and the guy said, "Oh, but of course they do speak Russian in Eastern Ukraine," as if somehow speaking Russian is reason enough to give up your freedom.
USA should just concede and become Britain again. You know?
Exactly. Yeah, my parents are Irish, not just the USA, but Ireland, Australia, New Zealand, Canada should all become part of the English empire because they speak English. I mean, but people use this argument the whole time. I mean, it's really widespread.
It's a failure of understanding reality. It's a failure of media. It's a failure of a lot of things. But luckily, during this war, Russian soft power just collapsed. Like in Ukraine, it just collapsed. And you have, you can be all kinds of Russian sympathizer, but as long as Russia is not throwing bombs at your house, and then you start thinking maybe this is not the way I want to be ruled.
Can you explain the phenomenon of forced mobilization to people in the West? Because this never gets talked about.
Yeah, it's another issue that I forgot to mention when you asked me about Elon Musk. Basically, the Russian narrative is that it's protecting people of Donbass, while in fact it killed almost all able-bodied male population of Donbass. Russians are spreading like some kind of plague. They take over some area, they say this is Russia, and in Russia we have mobilization, we're at war, so you get mobilized and you get sent into these meat storms at Ukrainian positions because you cannot train somebody fast and make them to make them become modern army, but you can still cause some trouble by giving him an assault rifle and forcing him to run at our positions. So actually Russia is kind of also doing a little genocide in Donbass, probably more than other areas because other areas are fighting back. And this is also some aspect that makes these comments let just Russia have it so evil and delusional. Comments like this should not be tolerated in Western society at all. People should punch these people in the face when they say that.
Is forced migration also an issue?
Sure.
Because, I mean,
Russia is also, as you know, like from the news, Russia is systemically stealing Ukrainian children. So
this is not in the news very much in the West, actually.
yeah, I think there's some coverage of that, and there's like UN decisions about, and the International Criminal Court actually issued the warrant on Putin because like his officials were openly admitting that, and Putin was like hanging out with some of these children in some TV shows.
Just to elaborate, because this is news to me, where is Russia stealing children from?
From occupied territories. They will claim that they're saving them, from the war, but they in fact take them to Russia, make sure they're not able to contact their parents, get them into some Russian schools and start indoctrinating them about evil Ukrainians and how they were saved by Russia.
So just brainwashing youth.
I mean, this is also people don't understand that Russia has been trying to destroy Ukrainian identity for hundreds of years. And but now, luckily, and we have lost this conflict before. We have been occupied for hundreds of years, and now, luckily, we have some international support. We have statehood, internationally recognized statehood. So this is one of the reasons why Ukrainians are fighting so hard and so heroically, because this is like a centuries-old trauma about being occupied and killed by Russia again and again. In Holodomor and in the previous episodes, Russia is saying that Ukrainian language does not exist, and at the same time, it is banning Ukrainian language for hundreds of years. Like, you don't ban something over and over and over in hundreds of years, something that does not exist.
Okay.
This triggered this long-term trauma feelings again, and almost every family has some Holodomor genocide stories. And so now this is our chance to fight back, and this is why we're fighting so hard. And this is also why Elon Musk and others are pretty delusional that you can just stop supply of weapons and Ukraine will just fold and agree to Russian terms. Still, this is our best chance to fight Russia back and
have an independent
best chance in hundreds
identity.
Of years. Yeah.
So you told me a bit about your family history in a Telegram chat.
Yeah, I can talk shortly about that, because I have a funny family, because one part of them is Ukrainian, and they suffer both my grandmother and grandfather, family suffered a lot in Ukraine, and the father's parts of the family are they're from Russia and Belarus, and my father of my father, my grandfather was a high-ranking Soviet officer, so they were pretty well off in the USSR. They thought it was great and nice and stuff. And the other parts of the family, in one of them, all the kids died in the Holodomor. The mother went crazy and then had another baby, and that was my grandfather. And in my grandmother's mother, her father was just taken away at night, in the 30s, and no one ever saw him again. And her mother got a stamp in her passport that she is wife of the enemy of the state. And first of all, they were forced to move, because enemies of the state are not supposed to live near the border. So they were forced to move, and they could not work officially. For a long time, they were fighting in the court, because not being able to work, she was selling some bakery illegally, and they wanted to imprison her for that. And they were fighting that off, and some high-profile lawyer protected them for free, and so they avoided jail. So, and of course, they hate everything about Soviet Union, hate with all their guts. And again, it's weird to me that people rely so much on their own experience and don't chase the truth, because our experience is always limited. So you need to get the whole picture. And Russians collectively just fail at it completely. Intellectuals, non-intellectuals, they fail. They live in alternate reality.
Can you explain what the Holodomor massacre is to people in the West who might not have heard of it?
Yeah, sure. It's a hunger in the 30s where by some numbers between like 7, perhaps up to 15 million Ukrainians were killed. And you know, as you know, Ukraine is like breadbasket of the world. There cannot be a hunger in Ukraine. Like Ukraine is the last place in the world where there would be like mass hunger. And Russia would say that this is not genocide. Other regions like in Povolzhia were having hunger as well. But this is like, if you look into it, this is pretty well-researched topics. There are a lot of documents that Ukraine, during collectivization, it's failed completely. It was by force. The state was taking away all the food. The state, also in any other like starvation episode, you would have like problems in the cities at first because they run out of food, while people on the countryside have food. And here it was the other way around. Leading up to that, there was like thousands of little uprisings during the collectivization. So many of them were armed. So like being tired of fighting all this uprising, I think this is what the Soviet Union decided to do. It just starved these people to death. And unlike other regions of the Soviet Union, I mean, this is to counter like the Russian narrative that this is not a genocide, but like a hunger. Soviet Union exported a lot of food. Unlike other regions, Soviet Union banned moving between villages and cities for Ukrainians. In Ukraine and Kuban, which was populated by a lot of Ukrainians, these are the only regions in the Soviet Union where during this hunger you were not allowed like to go somewhere and look for food. You were supposed to just hang out there and die. And also the state not only took away all your food, but it also could take away anything that could be exchanged for food. I mean, this is, if you look into this is a pretty well-researched topic. It's clearly like mass murder of Ukrainians on a huge scale. And then right after that, the Second World War happened, where most of the death in Soviet Union were also in Ukraine. And most of the fighting was also in Ukraine. And the wave came through all of the Ukraine twice, like one way and on the other. And like in percentage terms, much more Ukrainians died like than Russians. I mean, this is what makes this war even crazier, because Russians are like so proud of this super victory they have. But it was won because you were fighting with Ukrainians alongside you. So they are like your greatest brothers. And as I was growing up, I'm a Russian-speaking Kyiv guy. I was also growing thinking, well, we're brotherly nations, you know. So Russians are saying that now that, you know, Ukrainians betrayed us, blah, blah, blah. No, guys, you betrayed us. You betrayed your history. We were fighting, much more of us died in percentage terms for your great super victory, which you're so fucking proud about, and now you just come to kill us, to come and invade us. I mean, your grandfathers would like turn over in your graves if they knew about it. This is, and people just are. I don't know how you cannot like look at this way. Anyone who has like some 2 cells in their brain can see it. I don't know.
Something you mentioned in a Telegram chat is the fact that the USSR started World War II. So I had the idea or the impression, being quite historically ignorant, that the USSR were passive victims of Germany invading the USSR.
Yeah.
Is this not the case?
Yeah, sure. Well, it's well known. Again, I'm not the person to interview about it, but the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, which was an agreement between Germany and Soviet Union about non-aggression, but it also had a secret protocol which was really proven up until Nuremberg trials, that people were not sure that this is true. And the secret protocol also divided into countries into spheres of influence, and they agreed to invade Poland, and Soviet Union invaded Poland with Germany. And this is also something that I never learned at school, but Russians are just completely, they have no idea about it, most of them. And they all also, like, when Hitler invaded the Soviet Union, like long-term Soviet Union got this wonderful excuse that we are just, you know, wonderful people, loving, peaceful country, and we were invaded by these evil Nazis, and we defeated them with a lot of casualties. But the fact is, you agreed with the Nazis to start a war against other nations together with them, and you invaded Finland, and then you invaded Poland. So you kind of inflicted this on yourself to a degree, because you started the World War that you suffered from, kind of. And the other aspect of this is because Germany got obliterated, the Nazis got their Nuremberg trials, and the country now, everyone is sorry about that and understand that we were wrong and stuff. But the Soviet Union, Nazis, they killed massive amounts of Jews and other peoples, but Soviet Union killed their own people in massive numbers in gulags. And nobody ever took some responsibility in Russia for that. So German Nazis are not in power anymore, and Germans know that was bad, but the descendants of Russian Nazis are still in power. They did Holodomor, they did gulags, and now they're invading us and killing us again. So I think that this can be part of a bigger conversation, how do you deal with Russia long term, because for something to change and for Russia to become a normal country like others, because in many ways I still think that Russia is closer to Europe than to Asia, as they're claiming now and stuff. But this needs to be addressed. There needs to be some massive lustration of all the KGB and disclosing all their archives and stuff, and people need to be educated for generations that they did a lot of bad things. People know that Nazis are bad, but communists, it's not so clear.
Right.
But you need to understand that this is the same level of evil, and they need the same treatment.
Right. In the West, no one is going to go around saying, hey, I'm a Nazi, it's a respectable intellectual position. It's known in society that that's a bad position.
Yeah, but it's perfectly fine to say I'm a communist.
Yes. They don't recognize what it involves or what the human cost is in history. There's that expression, history is written by the victors. So I guess what you were describing before is the fact that because Russia was a victor in the Second World War.
And it was kind of invaded by Germany. So it got to play this moral leader of the world, while in fact this is an evil anti-human regime that will just kill by the millions only just to make their leader look a little bit better. So I'm not saying that other countries are angels and stuff, but the threshold that the state would need to pass to kill someone or kill a million people is just much higher.
A Ukrainian friend of mine in London recently said that she thinks that all Ukrainians have gone through this process in their own lives of growing up feeling that maybe in your case the Russians were brothers, or that it was a kind of brotherly culture, or sometimes Ukrainians might have felt that Ukraine was an inferior culture to Russia because Russia has all this architecture and literature and music and so on. But all Ukrainians have now gone through this process of realizing, oh wait, hold on, we're the cool ones.
Yeah, sure.
It sounds like that's been a journey for you. Does that ring true for most Ukrainians and for yourself?
Sure, not all Ukrainians consider Russian brothers for sure. But I'm talking about my childhood, how I watched all the Soviet media and the movies and. Yeah. By the way, another important point here is that the story about Ukraine is really similar in some ways to the Rwanda genocide in the 90s. Remember the story of the radio of the Thousand Hills and stuff? So there was research there. So that there's one ethnic group killed other ethnic groups, and there was some research about areas where this happened. And so there was some radio station that was calling that you should chop those nasty Tutsi people. And because of the hills, in some villages there were no receptions of this radio, and there was there was no genocide there. So basically this genocide was entirely caused by propaganda. And so in Ukraine, the story is similar because up until basically the views Ukrainians have about Maidan and the views about supporting like Russia or not is decided not so much by their speaking Russian language, how Westerners, how many people think about it, this is just completely wrong, and not so much by their location, but the choice of the TV channels they prefer to watch. So Donbass and Crimea always loved watching Russian channels more than other places. So from the early days of Maidan, they were showing that evil Nazi nationalists are like dancing there and stuff and chanting Bandera. And so people who supported like Russia or were anti-Ukraine during this conflict, this was just caused by watching Russian television propaganda.
Oh.
So I think that Russian propagandists should be, I don't know, punished very bad. This is like a huge cause of so many deaths.
Wasn't the ethnic composition of Crimea changed as well due to forced migration again?
Sure, it was changed many times, by the way. I don't know if you know this, but basically Stalin forced all Crimean population out. Like it was...
He vacated the island.
Yeah, it was much less populated, and it was populated by majority of Tatars. Again, I'm not a history teacher for something, but I could be wrong in some details. But basic story is that after the war, Stalin said that, Tatars cooperated with Nazis, so he took 100% of the population elsewhere, and then there were a lot of Russians. And then comes Elon Musk and says, well, we should ask those Russians if they think Crimea should be Russian. And to some degree, this also happened after 2014 as well.
So last question for you as a macroeconomist, as well as a Ukrainian. A lot of people in the West, who I often otherwise agree with, making arguments starting from points that I agree with, for instance, saying things like America gets involved in too many foreign wars where it doesn't really understand the local situation, or they're saying the American economy is in trouble, which is clearly true. And then they're drawing the conclusion from this that America should not be funding the Ukraine war. What is the argument against this?
Well, first of all, that America is interested in not having a nuclear war in the world and not interested in no nuclear proliferation. And if Ukraine submits after giving up nuclear weapons, then this is that nuclear proliferation is all but guaranteed. There are a lot of nations out there that are capable of achieving like nuclear weapons, and you will first of all clearly show to any state actor serious enough that this is what you should do to protect your security. Like this is the biggest one, of course. And there are a lot of more arguments. First of all, America is obviously investing a lot of money, huge, 800 billion a year into security, and here is getting the best bang for its buck because it doesn't have to bleed and lose soldiers, and the help to Ukraine is really small compared to degradation of one of America's core enemies. And more about that, these calculations of how much tens of billions of aid Ukraine is getting, I mean, it's also based on valuation at purchase value, but while a lot of the equipment is pretty old and is somewhere in these stocks and it's about to be written off, so if you take amortized values, it could be quite a bit less, and America still has a lot of old hardware that is going to be amortized to zero, and then they need to be disposed of. And Ukraine would gladly accept that stuff. So it's actually not that expensive. It's an investment in your security, and it's a best bang for your investment into your security. Because if Ukraine loses, the world is going to be a much worse place. While on the contrary, if Ukraine wins, then the world and Europe will be much safer and stuff.
So it's basically an investment in the future.
Yeah, investment in security, sure, and it's really good one.
Ilya, slava Ukraini.
Слава, героям слава.
If you like this video, like and share so that other people can discover it, and subscribe and turn on notifications so that you can see new releases when they come out. And if you'd like to pay for my travel into a war zone, support Operation Tiggy on Patreon. I'm also hiring a local team, so this creates employment in a country that's had its economy badly hit by the war.